I want to welcome everybody to the Empower Grief Journey podcast. I'm your host, Chris Mamoni, and I'm an acceptance coach who helps people heal from grief, loss, and trauma to discover their self-acceptance and step into their personal power. This podcast is your dedicated space for healing, growth, and transformation. Each episode shares insightful and inspirational stories along with practical tools and actionable insights to help guide you along your healing journey. Together, we'll explore the hidden gifts, lessons, and blessings inside grief that can empower you to reclaim your life and create an inspiring future. Maria Roney is a healer and intuitive guide and teacher, supporting women who are ready to transmute the pain of the past to awaken their divine feminine power and experience true freedom and joy and abundance in their life. In 2020, Mariah escaped a 20-year abusive relationship that ended in her husband's suicide. Traumatized and with her life shattered, she consciously set out on a very painful and very beautiful healing path. She went from daily panic attacks, substance abuse, coping with PTSD triggers, and complex trauma, complicated grief to awakening her intuitive and healing gifts and living a sacred life of practices that honor her body, mind, and soul. She now lives a dream life down by the beach with so much love, joy, and peace, doing what she loves, supporting other women to heal. She wants you to know that if she can do it, so can you. And without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, I want to introduce Mariah today on the podcast. How are you doing today
Hey,
from down
Chris.
under?
Good. How are you? Except my name is Maria.
Maria, I do apologize. I'm bad at
That's
that.
okay. That's okay. I'm very flexible. Anyway, thank you so much for having me on your podcast, Chris. It's an honor to be here. And I love the work that you're doing in this world.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate that. And I'm really grateful and honored you're here as a guest today because when we connected last week, and you shared your story of what you went through, it was very moving for me because I can relate to
Mm.
some of that trauma, not all of it, but I can relate to some of it and how that can really have an impact on the quality of our lives. And I think that it's really powerful that you navigated the story you're about to share. I'm not going to ruin it for everybody, but I think it's very powerful how you navigated that and worked through your trauma to become the person you are today.
Thank you. Thank you, Chris. I really appreciate those beautiful, kind words.
Yeah, you're welcome. Well, share a little bit of that story with us.
Okay. It was 2020, so it was the year that we were all working from home and all of the COVID stuff was happening. Um, and I had started to realize that I wasn't happy. I'd been realizing this for a long time. And But through that year, I got the courage through the personal growth that I'd really started, my spiritual journey that I'd started really going into then. And I just surrendered to the universe, and I had the courage to tell my husband that I wanted to leave the relationship. Now, I'd realized that I was in an abusive relationship at that point. And, things were just getting worse and worse and spiraling out of control. And unfortunately, my worst nightmare came true, in that he took his own life. And it was actually something that had held me hostage in the relationship for a long, long time. But when I really surrendered to the universe this one particular day, and I was just like, I know it's going to be bad. I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know how he's going to react, but I'm strong enough. I just can't live this way any longer. And I just surrendered to it. Um, and you know what? That it didn't help what followed, because it was, then that led to this like extraordinary, like painful and beautiful healing journey. Like this, I have so complex, complicated grief, complex trauma, PTSD, and I didn't know how I was going to heal, but I knew that I wanted to find some peace because I'm like a optimistic person by nature. And so when like my worst nightmare came true, I was just like, I don't know how I didn't know how I was gonna live with myself. I don't know, I didn't know how I was ever going to have peace again. And so, but I was also determined, because when I started getting some help and realizing that I'd been in a coercive, controlling relationship for 20 years, and what it had done, um, to my confidence, to who I was, um, I really then decided that I didn't want his choice to be a life sentence for me, as it was designed to do, like designed to be, it's the, other than the fact that he didn't take me as well, like it's, a prime example of, the worst kind of um, coercive control, domestic violence, if people aren't familiar with that term.
Yeah, I remember you sharing your story last week and saying that it was always, he always pressured you in a lot of ways with threatening to take his own life and really hung that over your head a lot. And I can't
Mm,
imagine how suffering that is to, or suffocating is the word I was looking for with that, suffocating to have that pressure on yourself where if you
mm,
decide to make a choice for yourself and what's in your best interest, for you, then this person's going to do severe harm to themselves. And that's just,
yeah.
I mean, that's got to be a very hard place to make that choice and have the courage to do what's right for you.
Yeah, and I needed to, and I say, like, I chose myself that day for the first time, because I'd been giving myself away for 20 years, if not my whole life, like, just, as an empath, taking on too much, taking on other people's stuff, like, and I know that I'm a healer now, or I support others in their healing journey, and so, I was probably unconsciously trying to help and trying to heal him, but it was as we know, you you're your own healer and you can't heal anyone else, right? But I gave all of myself away, and then that, Chris, that continued when he was gone, and I would then give myself away to everyone else, like um, people don't know what to say to a woman whose husband has just killed himself, right? And so I would rescue people over and over and over. And because I would fill in the blanks, people, like, and I know that I just kept giving myself away, and it just drained me. It just took so much out of it. And it wasn't until much later that I learned to receive and to give to myself.
That's powerful because I think that's something that many people do in the grief process when they lose someone is, we lose somebody we're close with in a lot of situations. And long story short, we have a void now when they're gone, and
Yeah.
we're used to this person in our life, and now there's this empty space, and how do we fill it? Really becomes the question. And some people fill that with, addictions and habits, things like that.
Yeah.
Other people
Yeah.
go out there and give and give and give. And
Yes.
the thing that we forget though is that, we only have so much energy. It's the analogy
Mhm.
of flying on a plane when they say put your mask on first before you help other people.
Yes,
Um, it
exactly.
it's that age-old adage there that we have to take care of ourselves, and sometimes we forget to do that.
That's right. Exactly, exactly. And look, Chris, I did all of the things, in what I call it, the dark night of the soul in my language. And it's, and it's the journey of this complex, complicated grief. Like, I wanted to be separate from him, right? Just not in this way. So, but he was still a man I'd spent 20 years with and loved, right? So much love and commitment, and we built a life together and everything. So there was the grief of the ending of the relationship anyway. And then there was a separate grief of, like, can't people like break up without someone dying, right? That's
Yeah.
a bit of dark humor from me there. But it's like there was some grief and anger about that, because like, why couldn't it just be that we separated everything, right? But what I know now is that because of the shocking ending, that's what really propelled me into my gifts. That's what really cracked me open to the person I am today. But the path I've taken, like, it's been like a mixed bag, right? It's been horrific. Um, it's been beautiful. It's been like, you'll know this, Chris, like the emotions that you just never knew existed, right? That they're so dark, they're so low, they're so painful. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, those I've been there myself, losing my first child and my only child.
Yeah.
There's a part of this grief process that especially with things like you and I have gone through, that those emotions are so heavy. You end up in this very dark place. I really love your analogy of the dark night of the soul, because that's I can relate to that in a lot of ways. You end up in a very dark place where you don't see the light, and you really end up, questioning everything. Even your own, you question your
Yeah.
beliefs, you question, what was this relationship about? Why did this happen to me? How could this possibly happen? How am I supposed to get over this? How am I supposed to handle this?
Yeah.
You're just overwhelmed with all these heavy, heavy
Yes.
negative emotions, and you're
Mm,
at a certain point you kind of scream at yourself and you're like, how do I get out of this? Like, how do I,
mm.
what's moving forward look like?
Yeah, that's right. Exactly. Exactly. It's not an easy journey at all. And one thing that I really learned, Chris, is that the more I accepted the emotions that were happening and stayed present to them, the more quickly they would pass, um, because energy goes in waves. Like, we know this scientifically, energy goes in waves. And so, of course, we as humans, being energy, go in waves, and the grief journey has like big waves, and it really extends us. And also, Chris, when you just made me think before about, this dark night of the soul is like, it's almost like a real incubation period. It's like being like the seed, right, of a plant, and just being in all this darkness and all this denseness, and not knowing when you're ever, or if you're ever going to see the light again. And that's like a real thing, right? Don't know if you're ever going to see it.
Yeah, I was laughing inside a little bit as you were talking, because there's a couple analogies I came across through my coaching practice. And one of them is, I equate grief to this statue. And I have not figured out where this statue is in the world, by the way, so I apologize for that lack of reference. But it's a very form-fitted, muscular man on the first half of the body, and in his hand, he has a chisel and a mallet. And at the very bottom of himself, he's a very obese, huge guy on the bottom. And what you see on this break between the muscular guy and the overweight part of his body is all this rubble, all this rocks that he's chiseled off
Mm,
himself. And so I kind of equate that, when I went through grief, I thought about that, and I said, before we go through grief, we're one version of ourselves. We're Mariah 1.0. That's who we are. We start with. Then we go through this grief process. And then grief is where we start chiseling away all these parts of ourselves that no longer exist because our life has changed.
yes,
And so now there's this whole new
absolutely.
person that has come out of this grief process. And that whole new person is very, very different. That's the 2.0 version of ourselves.
Yeah,
And it's almost like, for lack of a better term, it's like dating ourselves again. It's going like, who am I? What is this
yes,
person of myself now? I don't recognize this.
absolutely.
Uh,
Absolutely. I know. Well, and because I'd given myself away, and I was only 26 at the time I entered this relationship. And then I was like, what, 46, I guess, when I came out of it. So I would have grown in that time anyway. And but I really was like, who even am I now? And it was like scary. I don't know who I am. I've been giving all these parts away of myself for all of these years. And to really then go, well, what are my innate qualities and who do I want to be? And like, I love how you said, like, 2.0, I'd say like 60 billion point oh. Like
Love that.
there's I feel like it's been a constant death and rebirth ever since. And that's what I teach, like people who come to my workshops and in my sessions. Like I teach like this process of letting go, and then knowing, because part of the letting go for me, it wasn't just about the grief and the trauma. It was like the critical thoughts I had on myself, because just because he was dead doesn't mean that that abuse stopped. I beat myself up so hard. And so it's like really having some gentleness and self-compassion towards self, which was super hard. I didn't even know how to do that to start off with. To really, and I think that's like the underlying energy for grief, for the grief journey or the healing journey, is to have that self-compassion.
I think it's a big component of it. Something that I came across because I went through narcissistic abuse a few years ago, and
Yeah,
it's awful. I don't wish it on anybody.
no,
Because like you said, that trauma, everybody says, "Oh, well, just get over it. It just happened. They're not even in your life anymore." And I said, "You don't understand. That kind of abuse lives up here. It's hard. It's hard to get
yeah,
out of it." And
yeah,
the thing that I share with people about that is that um, we have to figure out how we're going to move forward. And that's a really complex thing because what you were just talking about, by the way, in a lot of ways is self-forgiveness, something we don't really talk about. And
yeah, big
we
time.
we know how to blame ourselves really well. We know how to shame
Mhm.
ourselves really well. We
Yeah,
know what guilt feels like. We can do that real fast.
really
When
good.
we
Yeah,
but when it comes to forgiving ourselves, we almost like freeze like a pause screen on a Zoom call and we're like, "Oh, what, forgive myself for what? What, how?"
yeah, yeah,
I had to learn, since you brought that up, it reminded me I had to learn to forgive myself. I had to teach myself that. And
yeah.
because I used to be so mad at my abuser, I just really couldn't handle it. And I got to a place though where I said, I'm so angry at this person. They're not in my life anymore. And then I said, what am I
Mm,
really upset about? And I sat there one day and I asked that and I said, okay, now we're turning the thing into myself now. So now I have to figure this out. And then what I came down to is that there were things I tolerated and things I allowed in my life. And I did the best I could in that moment with the knowledge, skills, and tools that I had. But when I looked backwards on it, I said, I'm going to take away from this that this is what I tolerated and allowed, and this is the situation that came out of this. And it wasn't good. I have trauma from it, and I have to work through that.
yeah,
And
yeah.
like you said, it's a very constant death and rebirth process. And I'll share for the listeners today that this death and rebirth process that we're talking about today, it's not fun. It's not like a yay, we're gonna rebirth and it's gonna be all good. No, it's very messy. It's very you're gonna
Very,
feel hard emotions, heavy emotions. You're gonna doubt yourself. You're gonna guilt yourself sometimes, but when you go through that process, and I'd love for you to share a little bit about your rebirth process, you come out the other side in a very different place.
absolutely. And look, I would say that it gets easy, it gets lighter, right? So, like I said before, I was searching for peace, but actually, what I found was so much more. Like, I've like totally recreated my life. Like I moved cities and live by the beach. I do what I love now. I love my work. I love supporting women in their healing. And it lights me up. And the more I support others in their healing journey, the more I heal. And I have this tattooed on my arm, healed and healing. And that's
Ooh.
actually the name of the podcast that I'm going to release soon. And it's you know, we go in this dark night of the soul, not knowing what we're going to find. But in my experience, I've just found so much extraordinary beauty and gratitude. And it's like I can start to take the healing journey now with some more lightness. And it's been 4 years on because we've got, the trauma that we remember this lifetime, like that we're conscious of. Then we've got the trauma that we don't remember, the stuff from childhood, being called names or whatever, like, or the stuff that we've like embodied, because we know trauma lives in the body, not in the mind. And then there is past life trauma. There's intergenerational trauma. There's stuff that we literally carry in our DNA, right? So when we go, wow, okay, that's a lot. I'm going to be healing for the rest of this lifetime, but we can actually say, like, it's a joyful path now. Like, healing is growth, it's expansion, it's having a more deeper conscious understanding of self, of others, of humanity, of the universe. So it's like, even though it's messy, it's not simple, it's those waves, right? But when we commit to it, then that's when we start to really see that light. And in the energy waves, we literally go up another vibration. And so our old highs are now our new lows.
Yeah, I think you're 100% right with that. It's a bumpy road. I've always told people that, especially when you're dealing with grief, there's when I lost my son, for example, there were days that grief was just like a big wave. Just, I mean, it hits you with such force that it makes it
Yeah.
almost unbearable to live during the day.
Yes. Yes.
Then there's other days you feel very happy and fine and normal, like nothing
Exactly.
happened. And it's just that
Exactly.
that wave you were talking about. It's just early on in your trauma process, it's frequent and it's heavy. And then as
Oh,
time
and it's
goes
heavy.
on,
Absolutely.
yeah, it kind of levels itself out a little bit.
That's
Uh,
right.
and
Exactly.
that's not to say you won't have a big wave every now and then. It happens.
Oh,
But
it
it's
100% happens. Yeah.
but, you brought up too that I thought was interesting when we first talked here as we got going. You brought up about listening to emotions, and I thought that was something really powerful.
Yeah.
Um,
Yes.
because I never really understood emotions until I got into the coaching world, and I
Mm,
understand now, and I love to share it with everybody and get your perspective on it. But emotions are messages within us; they're not bad things. There's all the time I hear people say these phrases like "control your emotions," and I'm like, can't control it. I can't hold anger. I can't hold happiness. I can't hold
yeah.
sadness. It's all up here. So you have to start to learn how to communicate with your mind and say, certain questions. And I always tell people to stay away from why questions because it elicits blame. But I always
Mm,
say, what's causing me to feel the way I do today? Ask that question. And, that brings you to a place of, well, this happened or that happened, or I'm dealing with this part of grief. And or you can say, how is what happened today triggering for me? What's doing that?
mm,
Um, when you
mm.
listen to those emotions, you start hearing the messages. And like you said earlier, really eloquently, once you listen to them, they just pass, they go. And
Yeah, that's right. When you feel it. I would also add, mind and body, like the feeling, how is, what am I feeling in my body? How's my central nervous system feeling? Because and when, like you said, Chris, when you start asking yourself the questions, and I always say, like, the quality of the questions you ask yourself determine the quality of the answers you receive. And so when we start to ask ourselves questions, we can we can really tap into our intuition, right? That inner voice, like what I'd call that the soul voice, like our that quieter part, the part of us that just knows that this journey, this human journey, is an experience, and that my belief is that we're here to evolve as souls and to be as much love as we can.
I think that's really beautiful because that is, a big part of the healing journey for a lot of people. I think there's a lot of grief is very isolating and very lonely at times, and it's
Mm,
hard for us to process that in a lot of ways, because we're always battling, so much trauma. We're also battling who's safe to talk to, who's not. We're also dealing with how are we going to move forward. And I think when when you realize that there's other people out there that can help you and support you and you can go find
Oh,
them, um, that's when you can really start jumping in that space of, uh, having compassion for that process. And I talked to somebody a while ago that said, asked me if I was fully healed, and I said, no, I'm not fully healed. I never will be. And they looked at me really funny. They said, never fully healed? Like what? Why, how can you say that about yourself? And I said, because healing's not a destination; it's a journey. And
it's a thing. Yeah.
I said, but if you walk through life and say I'm healed, that means that you're letting go of everything, the experience itself, how you felt about it. And our brains don't work that way. They just don't. And so
No, that's
um,
right.
it's not
Exactly.
respecting yourself, not giving yourself compassion when you do that. So,
Yeah.
my belief is we're never going to fully heal from these things, and that's okay. Doesn't mean we're bad, but it just
Yeah.
means that we're living in the experience and we're taking it for what we should out of that. We're getting what we need from it. And I can always say too, I upset that I lost my son? Yeah, I'm still upset about that 3 years later. Very upset about it. But I
Yeah.
can share this though, had that not happened, I wouldn't be in the space I am today, helping the number of people that I am and connecting with people in the loss and grief community that, by the way, were isolated and alone, just like me, but now we have a community. And I
Absolutely.
always think
Absolutely.
about what a beautiful gift that is out of a big burden. That's just, it's a gift.
Absolutely. Yep, I absolutely get that. And, I live by this quote by Rebecca Campbell that life happens for us and not to us. So when we can take life's challenges, like the massive ones that you and I have had, Chris, or whether it's a smaller challenge, it's when we can look into it and go, how is this happening for me? Then that's when we start having grace. That's when we can start having more self acceptance and more self awareness.
I think those are the big things that help you move through grief. I truthfully don't think there's, I don't like the phrases in the grief community of like getting over it or letting go or like
Yeah.
moving on. Those phrases I don't like because it writes things off. So I really tell people there's moving forward with your grief. And
Mhm.
that's, it's a very personal journey. And the other thing I share too, and with that coinciding with it is that, don't compare any kind of grief or loss with people. It's a very individual journey, very personal journey.
Oh,
And so, we may not
yeah,
all experience the same loss in the same exact way in the same format, but we will experience grief one way or the other. And it's our individual journeys on that grief path that how we heal and how we work through things can help inspire other people and guide other people on how to find their journey and find their path.
absolutely. And that is so true, Chris. Like we cannot compare to others. We can't compare like our growth or the healing, because we don't know, like you don't know what, like I don't know what kind of healing that I might have in past lifetimes, or that I'm not aware of yet. All I can do is show up for myself day in, day out. And Chris, like I have a lot of practical tools and practices that I use like on a daily basis to support this journey, because it's there, even though it's can be really hard at different times, when we know what works for us and what we need, body, mind, and soul, we can really pass through those harder times faster.
So I want to ask you, about your journey after your husband committed suicide. What did that healing journey look like for you? I mean, I think a lot of people sometimes have this conception that grief is linear. A lot of people have that thought, and
Yeah.
I want to ask you because you've got a unique take on this space. Describe that healing journey for you. Was that a linear process for you, or did you have a lot of ups and downs? And
Mm.
well, what
Oh,
was that
so
like?
much. Yeah, I think that grief is never linear, no matter what anyone says. I know that there are stages of grief, but they don't go in order. And so for me, Chris, my personal experience was this profound numbness when it all happened. Like it was, I can't possibly express, I just couldn't feel anything. And I was like, literally like, I can't feel anything. I actually fought against it because I was like, I should be upset or I should be, I couldn't feel anything. Um, and then I think that the numbness lasted for a few months. And in that, there were most certainly times of anger, big anger, massive anger, and, very upset, despair, absolute despair. And, but you know what? Numbness helps. Numbness helped me get stuff done. Like numbness helped me organize a funeral, right? Like that's all kinds of messed up that I had to do that, but I did, and that's the space I was in. And so then, when anger arrives, the energy of anger, amazing, gets so much done. Like I literally cleared out my whole house one night. I ripped all the pictures off the wall. I grabbed all his clothes, chucked them in garbage bags, and I threw them all in a pile downstairs. And so anger is super helpful, like to get stuff done as well. Because then when the numbness started to wear off, oh, you know, like not fun. So the numbness protects us,
Hmm.
like our central nervous system protecting us from what was meant to kill us, basically.
That is
And
the
so,
first time I've heard that about numbness. I appreciate that perspective.
yeah, and like, so if I could, and that's why I say it, because I'm like, for anyone, like, embrace the numbness, it's your friend. Like, it's just protecting you for now. And then the emotions will come, right? Like the emotions came for me. And look, I did a whole pile of stuff, Chris. Like I drank a bottle of wine every day. And I got up, I was doing CrossFit training at the time. I got up at 4:30 every morning and trained as well. I went back to work 6 weeks after. I was so hard on myself. And so I as that numbness wore off, and I was doing all kinds of things that weren't good for me, and I came to a point and I had to ask myself if I wanted to continue going down this path. And so I had to choose myself again. Like, did I want to keep drinking a bottle of wine a day? Totally understandable. And I 100% forgive myself for that because it was a coping mechanism. But I had a trauma therapist who really helped me unpack the complex, complicated grief and help me understand that trauma lives in the body and somatic healing, so that, the movement, yoga, dancing, tapping, like lots of different tools. I I then went, because I was already a coach. I I was leaning into my intuitive and my spiritual journey. So then I sought out coaches and healers, because I also did some talk therapy, like with a counselor, and I just felt like I was regurgitating my story over and over, and it was re-triggering me. And so my journey was, kind of unique. It wasn't the traditional talk therapy and, you know, antidepressants. I I just had this, I was having panic attacks and anxiety attacks like every day. And some of them at work, and it wasn't fun at all. But then I came across an energy coach, and I had one session with her, and the daily panic attacks stopped overnight. Yeah,
Wow.
so powerful.
Uh,
And it's like it's a deep subconscious healing. So you don't talk about it, because what we like this is science. Because trauma lives in our body, when we talk to our conscious mind is so limited. And when we talk about what we know about our trauma or our grief, we're actually bringing it alive again and again. So this
Mm.
deep subconscious healing doesn't involve talking about it. We do need to talk to release 100%, especially if you're a talker like me. But yeah, I went through this process. And so then I went and trained in the modality because it's so powerful. And so then I went, I sought healers and I shifted and I changed and I learnt ways to manage triggers. So I have a whole bunch of stuff I do to support me in my journey. And I don't have many PTSD triggers anymore, but occasionally I do. And I know what to avoid. I know how to handle them. And I know how to accept them now.
I think that's really powerful what you just said because part of the grief trauma process I've gone through, I've had triggers like that. I've had complex PTSD symptoms, and I never really understood it till I read a book about it, but basically, it keeps you in a trauma loop in your head. Like basically, like you said about not speaking that out because every time you do, you give it power. Well, complex PTSD is basically it's living up here and your brain is stuck like a bicycle thing, in fight or flight, and it just will not get out of it until you stop giving it power. But that's the really hard part is stopping giving it power. That's the really hard part.
Absolutely. And that mind loop is a symptom of the central nervous system. Like the the central nervous system being in the sympathetic state, the fight or flight. And then, for me, when I've started, use tools like tapping is just super powerful. EFT, there's heaps of free resources if anyone's interested in that. And getting out into nature and moving my body, like all of those kind of things, then, really help calm the central nervous system. So, like when my mind starts going like this, Chris, like looping over and over, I'm like, oh, okay, right, what's going on? Like, what do I need? Do I need some tapping? Like, start tapping like the points and asking myself questions about, you know, what's going on in my body and asking myself what I need. Those are really powerful ways to support self.
Well, I think that's something that's, not very talked about. And I wish there was more information on exactly what you're talking about with the central nervous system because
Yeah.
our bodies, the more I kind of laugh because I've gotten into woo-woo stuff, as most people call it. And I have learned it's really not in a lot of ways if you open your mind to it and just explore it, just see what it's about. Be in that childlike curiosity mode when you're learning those
Yeah,
things.
exactly, exactly. And like
Um,
quantum science is now catching up to the woo woo. So
Yeah, but I mean I've done very deep meditations before in my past, and I've broken trauma from the past. It's really I don't even
yeah,
have a way to really explain it, but when you're in that very deep meditative state and you can really work through those emotions without your conscious mind running, it's very powerful. And I share that with a lot of people because, I was happy to hear that you didn't do the traditional route of things like talk therapy and antidepressants. And I think, you're down in Australia. I'm over in the States, and I don't know what it's like down there because I haven't been there before. But in the States, there's a lot of people that end up on meds all the time, antidepressants and anxiety meds and this and that and the other. And I'm not a fan of those things in a lot of ways because they're addictive. They don't really fix the problem. And it's just taking pills to solve something, but you're never really solving the problem. And I think that's what, when I think about how there's phrases out there with grief like move on and let go. It's that same kind of thing where we're not dealing with it. We're allowing it to sit and persist, and over time, it's got to go somewhere. And I've shared that when I get asked about grief, I say, have you ever watched a Chinese ping pong tournament? Have you ever watched one of those? And a lot of people say no. And I said, well, don't focus on the player, focus on the ball. When you see it going across the table this many times, That's what your grief energy is doing inside here when you hold it down and suppress it. That's what it's doing, and it's got to go somewhere.
Yeah,
And
exactly,
so,
exactly.
so you'll end up with, random back pain on your left shoulder blade or right side of your lower
Yeah,
back or your knee will
yeah.
start. It'll
Whenever,
be random places. And that's your trauma and your pain trying to say, hey, let me out. Let me out of here. Like,
exactly. And look, with the choice to take medication, like I respect anybody who does make that choice. And it can be like a really great way to get to a baseline from which to do the healing. And so it's a tool like any other. Um, and the problem is that sometimes it's not used as the tool to help you get to a space so that you can actually regulate enough to make good choices for yourself. Um, yeah, and also on the central nervous system, there is this amazing lady I follow on Instagram, and she's got her own podcast too, and her name is Sarah Baldwin, and you can learn all things central nervous system from
hmm,
her.
I might have to
Yeah,
go check her out.
amazing. She's amazing. Like, yeah. So, and that's like knowledge is power, like understanding like this body, this system that we're not just heads walking around, but that we've
Yeah.
got whole body, whole magical bodies with so much information to give us and support us on our journey.
Yeah, a lot of people forget or don't even know for that matter. I'm a reading I call it I'm a self-taught self-improvement nerd. I read books all the times. I'm
Yeah,
like an
me too.
addict with it. I have a
Mhm.
serious library problem with books. But
Yeah.
anyway, our bodies, I read this article a while ago and I thought this was fascinating. We get new skin like every 3 days. Our whole exterior of our body is brand new skin like every 3 days.
Really? Every
We
three
get
days. Yeah.
we get like a new heart or new liver every 7 years. We
Yeah.
get
Yeah.
so well, the reason I share this is that our body is regenerating itself constantly. I mean,
Mm.
if it didn't do that, we'd die out a long time ago. That's just the fact of
Mm.
that. Um,
Exactly.
but so I share that to say that the body by itself, without any kind of external influence of things, is very resilient. It's very powerful. And
Absolutely.
when if we took the time to understand our body and listen to our body, it will tell us what's good and bad. It will. It'll
It
notify you.
absolutely.
Um,
Yeah. And that really
I've yeah, I've
sorry.
I've learned in NLP space too. Our body signals so many things when pain goes on. It's not always physical pain. It
Mhm.
can be mental pain going on somewhere else in your body.
Mhm.
Anxiety too. A lot of people get anxiety.
Oh, yeah.
That's your body trying to talk to you. You don't need a pill for it. What you actually need to do is listen to your body because it's trying to say something to you, where that anxiety is coming from.
Mhm.
I've learned too, anger, by the way, funny, people think anger is so negative. It's a great tool because anger is the part of
Mm.
you that loves you the most. And it's screaming, saying, I'm
Yeah.
not seen, I'm not heard, I'm not understood, I'm
Yeah.
hurt. It's giving you a big notification that something's off. I always share that, when your body's giving you signals like that, don't ignore them. And don't get too scared, by the way, because the body's resilient. It can take care of itself.
Yeah, that's right. Yes, because that really speaks to like the intelligence that lives, right? What the intelligence that we can call God or source, but the intelligence that makes the flowers open, right? That grows the plants. Like we are that same intelligence. So when we can like allow ourselves to heal in our own pace at our own pace and not try to control it, but to pay attention, to pay conscious attention to like what's going on with us.
Yeah,
Then we can, then, you know,
because the other thing, that I'll share that's interesting, and I had to learn this when I was going through anxiety that I had. I had bad anxiety for about three
yeah,
years. I don't know what the
yeah,
heck it was, but I learned, my body was like, hey, you can't do caffeine and high sugar anymore. And then my body was telling me that, saying, hey, this is too much. Like, get this out of here. And the minute I cut back on those things, I was fine. I also found out it was stress with jobs, stress with family, stress with all these things. And when I started removing the stress, my body was like, hey, we're good. I feel good. Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
our a lot of people don't know this either, by the way, but do you get to control how many times you breathe in a minute? Probably not, right? Your heart, by the way, it beats on its own. Your digestive system moves on its
Absolutely.
own. Um,
Exactly.
Most of our body is running subconscious. 95% of your breathing, your heart, your blood system, everything is running automatic. You're not thinking about it.
Yeah.
And
Yep.
so when you brought up intelligence, that's exactly what I think is that our bodies are more intelligent than we give them credit for. And it's sad that, a lot of us don't understand it because it's not talked about and it's not something that we educate people on. And so, when we rely on doctors to tell us how we feel and treat us for things that with drugs or surgery that just they're it's almost like, if you had a deep wound in your leg and you just try to put a band-aid on it, well, it's going to keep on bleeding. You're going to bleed out. You need stitches and seal up an artery. You have to get right into that core thing. And I think
Yeah.
that's what, bringing it back to what you talked about earlier on this podcast, with going through grief and that rebirth process, it's ugly, it's messy, it's uncomfortable. It's downright just nasty sometimes. But when we sit in that pain for a minute and we actually get down to that source, that pain starts going away because we start listening to
Yeah,
the
that's
body.
right. Yeah, because we're listening. Yeah, I love that, Chris. And it's what you've just said. It just really shows we're not in control anyway. It's just the ego, the conscious mind that wants to control our journeys. But it's and that's really why, because everything the subconscious mind carries all of our memories, everything. We need to address the subconscious mind, and that's why it's really helpful to work with someone, because I know that I wouldn't be as far as I am without that support to really help me tap into my subconscious mind and my energy so that I could release um, you know, the trauma.
I think it's just beautiful of your journey. I mean, I remember you telling me your story last week, and like I said, I just find it so inspiring and so powerful that you went through a very traumatic was losing your husband to suicide, but even further beyond that was the trauma of that relationship and being underneath that guilt and that blame constantly and being trapped like you couldn't make your own choice. And that's a scary place to be. And then have to deal with trauma on top of that. That's very complex. That's a hard thing to work through. And I think it's so inspiring that you're not living your life. You're living, six, so I forgot what you called it earlier, 6 billion to one, 6 billion.0. You're living on the beach, you're getting to work in your power, you're getting to really be who you are. And I think that,
Yeah.
all that stuff, sadly, as crazy as it's gonna sound, because it sounds crazy when I say it, but all that stuff happened for you, and it puts you on this
Oh,
path
absolutely. Yeah.
to live in your life.
Yep, absolutely. Like, I'm actually grateful for what's unfolded, because I'm, I'm having such a rich human experience. And look, I really understand the dark emotions, which means I can, and with my own work, I can hold space for anyone, for anything. And that's a gift that I didn't have before. It's like being able to now speak the language of grief.
And I think that's one of the most powerful things you can do for people is understand that language. When we go through grief, we go through loss, we go through trauma, just because, for example, like I had a stillborn and you lost your husband to suicide, it doesn't mean that those losses are comparable, but it does mean that we both got a gift to go help and understand grief just in a different capacity.
Absolutely. Yeah.
You're going to be able to work with people who've lost somebody to suicide a lot better than I will, and you're going to be able to relate to them in that language. And for me, I'm going to be able to be in the lost community with parents who lose a child and say, I can actually understand you. I can speak that language, and it's a powerful gift. I always call it the gift in shitty wrapping paper because it's the one we don't want,
Yes,
but we
yes,
got
me
it.
too. I
Um,
like that.
and so I love that you've taken that gift that's just ugly and you've turned that into something beautiful that you can help and serve other people that are going through similar trauma and show them there's a different road. and help guide them on their personal journey.
Yeah, thank you so much, Chris. It's an honor to be of service to people. And it's like we all have that choice, right? Because whatever challenges come up, no matter what exactly they are in life, life is always giving us opportunities to crack open and to become more love, more compassion. So
I
everyone has this opportunity, whether it's a different type of grief or a job loss or a relationship breakdown, heartbreak, whatever it is, life is always gives us opportunities to crack open even more to our authentic, real selves.
Well, I think that's something that's to be celebrated on the grief journey because I do feel like the more I'm in the grief space, the more I find the most real, authentic people that are just, I got asked the other day that, I got asked by somebody, I said, how do you have all these conversations with people that are wanting to commit suicide or have lost a child or been through a abusive relationship or, and it said, how do you handle that? And I said, it's not my experience, so I don't take it personally. But I said, the thing is, though, I was in a place in my grief journey where I didn't have somebody to talk to. I didn't have somebody that would listen to me. I didn't have somebody that understood me. And so I went through that by myself, and that was a very painful process. And it took a lot of strength and a lot of courage to get through it. And I said, but here's the thing. If I talk to people like I do every day that go through those things, and I'm that one person for them that listens and hears them out and helps
Mhm.
guide them, I feel that's so much of gift that I'm giving to somebody. And so for me to even have any selfish feeling about that is just not even necessary. It's just not needed. It's the fact that I gave somebody something I didn't even get. And the fact that I'm giving that gift to somebody really humbles you and makes you feel like you made a contribution to the world bigger than yourself. And that's what I
Yeah,
think
absolutely.
that's
Yeah.
what's so beautiful when you talk about compassion. That's what comes to my mind is, I've been through it by myself. I don't want that for somebody else. So when I see people
Yeah.
hurt, I just get this urge, like you said, in your healing journey. I get the urge to give. I get the urge to say, "Hey, I'll listen no matter how bad it is. I'm here," and
Yeah.
the difference
That's
that can make
beautiful,
in someone's
Chris.
world.
Yeah, I love that. That's so beautiful.
So, Mariah, I wanted to ask you, for listeners that have listened to this episode today, and it's something I ask all my guests that come on the show, what are one or two things you could share for somebody that is starting their grief journey, that has probably gone through a loss or trauma recently, and might feel a little bit lost on their grief journey? What are some tips you would share with them that could really help them navigate that a little easier?
Okay. The first one would be to trust the process. And it's like an affirmation that you can say to yourself because it is a process and grief will take its own path. It'll take you where it needs to go. And when you can lean into the different parts of that path and have practical tools that will support you and feel the emotions, cry the tears, tears are the healing waters. Go out and you know, yell and release the anger. I'm a huge fan of yelling in the car because it's like a safe, contained space. That's really helpful. And then learn other tools to support you, like you can pat your heart, really nurture self, like I am safe, just over and over. Even if you're bawling your eyes out, and also tapping, definitely look up a free resource online. There's heaps of videos. And just if you do your tapping while you're feeling the emotion, it will it will pass and it will release into the next. So I think work and know your support. So have boundaries. I think that's really important is to connect with people who are good for you. And you might be surprised who might be good for you. And you might also be surprised that the people who you thought would be really good for you and your journey aren't. And that's okay. Because, as we've talked about, Chris, last week, people can only meet you where they're at. They only have that capacity. So really just see someone might just pop out of nowhere and be there for you in your journey, and just really receive that support because it's your season to receive that love and support.
That's a beautiful message, Mariah. I appreciate you sharing that today. That's something I don't hear often, but I appreciate that so much.
You're welcome.
So I wanted to ask you, as we get wrapped up here, if anybody wants to connect with you and find you, where can they do that?
Okay. So you can connect with me on Facebook or Instagram, and both of those links will be in the show notes. I think, Chris, is that right?
Yep, I'll
And
have them there.
yeah, and so feel free to send me a message. Like if anyone wants to have a chat, and if they are interested in what I do or for support, please reach out. I will be very happy to have a chat. And also, I have a Goddess Isis activation for your next level health, happiness, and healing. And it is a 5-minute meditation that you do every day for 30 days. And it's actually got activation codes in it. It's a channeled um, activation from Goddess Isis, and she is like an ancient Egyptian goddess of healing, of magic, of fertility, of love.
That's beautiful. Where can we find that?
Oh, that link will be in the show notes too. So
Oh,
if that's
perfect.
okay, Chris. Yeah, yeah. So
I'm
you can.
excited to check it out myself.
Yeah, cool.
Well, Mariah, I want to thank you for being on the show, and I also want to thank our listeners today for joining me and Mariah. This has been an awesome episode of the Empower Grief Journey. I want you guys to remember the Empower Grief Journey is about honoring your journey, embracing your emotions, and finding strength in your own time. If this episode resonated with you, I'd like to invite you to subscribe by visiting my website, www.empowergriefjourney.com, and following me on Facebook and YouTube. More importantly, please share this episode with somebody who may need it. You're never alone on this journey, and together we can navigate grief with courage and compassion. Until next time, be kind to yourself and take your grief journey, one step at a time.
Thank you, Chris, so much for having me today.
Thank you.